In today's video, I'll walk you through building a Kanban board app. This project demonstrates how tools like Trello, Jira, or Notion manage tasks. Here are the features we'll cover. We'll start by creating a task. Click the plus button at the top of a column. Type the task name and click outside to save it. Next, we'll work on editing tasks. Click the edit icon to modify a task. Once you're done, click outside to apply the changes. We'll also delete tasks. When you click the delete icon, a confirmation pop-up will appear. If you confirm, the task will be removed. Otherwise, no action will be taken. The total number of tasks in each column will be displayed. It automatically updates when tasks are added or deleted. Finally, we'll implement drag and drop to organize tasks between columns. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe. For returning viewers, your continued support is always appreciated. Now, let's dive into the code. To start, create a container with a title inside. Next, create a container for the columns. Each column will have a title and tasks container. Within the column title, add an H3 element with a data tasks attribute. Next to it, include a button with data add attribute for creating a task. Duplicate the column structure and change the title. Next, add the Bootstrap icons library to the head section. Now, let's move on to styling the page. In the root element, define the variables for colors and the task size. Next, apply a common style for all elements. For the body, set the background and text color. Use a grid layout to cover the entire page. As for the title, add margin to the top and bottom. Then set a common style for all buttons. Constrain the container's width and center it. Use Flexbox to display the columns side by side. And make each column equally distributed. Then use a grid layout to stretch the columns all the way to the bottom. Align the contents of the column title horizontally. Then, add a bottom border to separate it from the tasks container below. Make the heading smaller and set it to all caps. Add an after pseudo element to display the task count for each column. Then move the Add Task button to the right and increase the icon size. In the HTML, create the individual tasks and make it draggable. Wrap the content of each task inside a div. Then add a wrapper for edit and delete buttons. Duplicate the task a few times. Then assign the dragging class to a random task. Let's also add the task input. Make the input editable and set a data placeholder attribute. In CSS, set the task container's display to grid. Apply the following styles to the task and task input. For individual tasks, set the cursor for visual feedback and add a transition effect. When dragging a task, reset the cursor and apply the following styles. Also, hide the contents during the dragging phase. Lastly, add a hover effect for tasks that are not moving. Next, use Flexbox to position the task buttons. Increase the button size as well as the icons inside it. For the task input, remove the outline. Then wrap the text to prevent stretching the container. Also add some space on the left side. Use this space to display an icon before the text input. Then center it vertically. Next, add a placeholder to indicate that it's an input field. Now, let's clear the tasks container. When deleting a task, a confirmation dialog should pop up. Here, create a dialog element with the class confirm modal. Wrap the contents inside a form. Add the title, warning message, and task preview. Lastly, add buttons for confirmation and cancellation. In JavaScript, display the modal so that we can style it. In CSS, ensure the modal is positioned correctly when opened. In its initial state, hide the modal and position it slightly below for a transition effect. Then center the modal and customize its default appearance. Add a backdrop when the modal is opened. Make the backdrop transparent in its initial state. Add space around the form and between its elements. Make the modal heading larger. Indent the task preview slightly and reduce its size. Then limit the text to 2 lines. Move the modal buttons to the right. Apply a common style to the modal buttons. Set a neutral appearance for the cancel button. Then emphasize the confirm button with a red color. To transition the modal, define its initial values in a starting style block. Then in its default state, add a transition. In JavaScript, delay the modal display and verify that the transition works. Now that we're done with the modal, let's clear the preview in the HTML. Moving on, let's create tasks dynamically using JavaScript. First, select the columns container in the individual columns. Next, create a function to generate a task element. This function will accept content as a parameter. Inside the function, create a div with the class task and make it draggable. Then structure its content as shown in the HTML. Finally, return the task element. Next, create a function for the task input with an optional text parameter. Inside the function, create a div with class task input. Set the data placeholder attribute and make it editable. Assign the text parameter as its content and return this element. When the Add button on each column is clicked, create a task input. In the columns container, attach a click event listener for adding tasks. If the click element is the Add button, invoke the handle add function. In this function, select the tasks container. Next, create a task input and append it to the tasks container. Lastly, focus the input so users can start typing right away. Next, when the input loses focus, convert it into a task element. Here, attach an event listener on blur event and call the handle blur function. Inside the function, define the input that triggered the event. Get the input's content and default it to untitled if it's empty. Use the content to create a new task. Lastly, replace the input with the new task. Now, the task input is replaced by the task element when it loses focus. However, when adding a task with multiple lines, it collapses into a single line. To fix this, replace the new lines with line breaks before creating the task. And that concludes creating a new task. Next, when the Edit button is clicked, we should allow users to update a task. Here, invoke the handle edit function if the clicked element is the Edit button. Inside the handler, select the task that triggered the click event. Next, create an input with the task's content. Replace the task with the input and focus on the input. Now, we're able to edit tasks, but the cursor isn't placed correctly, so let's fix that. Once we edit a task and lose focus, the task gets updated. And that wraps up this feature. Moving on, when the delete button is clicked, users should be able to remove a task. Here, add another condition for the delete button and call the handle delete function. Inside the delete handler, get the task and display the modal. Show the task preview to identify what will be deleted. Limit the task preview's length. When confirmed, remove the task from the task container. If cancelled, the modal should simply close. But before that, make the affected task accessible outside the function. When the deletion is confirmed, remove the current task. If cancelled, simply close the modal. In both cases, reset the current task after the modal is closed. That wraps up the delete task feature. Before moving to the next feature, let's add some dummy tasks to work with. Now that we have dummy tasks, let's work on updating the task count. When adding or deleting a task, the task count should update. So, create a function that takes a column as a parameter. Count the tasks in that column. Then update the data task attribute in the heading. Recall that in the HTML, the column title includes a heading with a data task attribute. Next, create a function to observe changes in the tasks container. Loop through each column and set up a mutation observer. It triggers update task count whenever tasks change. The target is the tasks container, and we monitor child list changes. Lastly, call this function to start observing changes. Now, the number of tasks in each column is displayed. And it dynamically updates when tasks are added or removed. That brings us to the end of this feature. For the drag and drop feature, let's start with the draggables. Here, attach a drag start and drag an event listener to each task. The drag start event triggers when the task is picked up, while the drag an event triggers when the task is released. When dragging starts, add the dragging class to the task. Here, the content disappears because the class is applied as soon as the drag start event occurs. To fix this, we can use setTimeout or request animation frame. Finally, when the dragging stops, remove the dragging class. Next, let's set up the drop targets, which are the tasks containers. When moving tasks over the task containers, the drag over event fires, while the drop event should fire when attempting to drop the task. By default, dropping is not allowed, so prevent the default behavior for both events. Next, get the drag task and the target element under it. The target can be the task container, the drag task, or an element within a task. So select only the relevant elements. If the target is empty, or the drag task itself, return immediately. If the target is a task container, append the drag task. If the target is another task, get the target's position on the page. We can use getBoundingClientRect method for that. As you can see, we can get the target's position as well as its size. To determine whether to move the task before or after the target, get the distance of its center to the top. We already know the top boundary's position, and we also know the height. Now, calculate the center of the target by adding its top position to half of its height. Next, get the mouse's vertical position. When the mouse goes down, the value increases, while it decreases when going up. We'll use the mouse position to compare with the target center. If the mouse's position is less than the target center, move the drag task before it. Otherwise, move it below. Now, tasks can be moved between other tasks and columns. There's one issue to tackle. When hovering over the gap between tasks, the task is placed at the bottom. Since the mouse is technically over the task container, it ends up appending the task. So let's fix that. First, append the task only if the task container is empty. That seems to fix the issue, but when dragging below the container, we can't drop it at the end of the tasks. So, let's approach this differently. We still append the drag task if the task container is empty, but let's do it by checking if the last task doesn't exist. If it exists, compare the mouse position to the last task's bottom position. If the mouse position is below the last task, append the drag task as well. Now, we can rearrange tasks on the Kanban board. And thanks to the observer we implemented earlier, the task count for each column updates automatically. And that concludes the drag and drop feature. Before wrapping up, let's add a few final touches. Here, use the Data Transfer API to set an empty plain text string. This ensures drag and drop functionality works smoothly on mobile. We can also set the drop effect for visual feedback. Next, we'll make the columns container responsive. Finally, let's add another column to the board. And with that, the Kanban board app is complete. We've covered task creation, editing, deleting, and drag and drop functionality. Thanks for following along. If you found this helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tutorials. Feel free to leave your thoughts or questions in the comments below. Until next time, happy coding!